All right, I've chosen Sonata in D major by Joseph Haydn. We've done a lot of sonata form this semester, so this should be pretty familiar. This first time through, we're just going to go over the large form. You should see it all labeled. Just kind of follow along. Oh, right. Here I've got my fancy dancy phrase labels. I tried to write as legibly as I could. I will go over this during the course of the lecture, and you should be able to kind of follow my train of thought. Anyway, let's listen to the piece. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Now we're going to go into the phrase structure a little bit. We'll talk about how I analyze the piece, and in front of you I've got some motives, some themes, and some tools that Haydn used to make the piece what it is. I'll bring your attention to that. Don't even worry about that. But I just want you to take note of these things, and we'll move on. Starting us off, we've got our primary theme. It's a period. There's nothing really unusual about it. I'm going to use this later in our detailed analysis, so we're not really going to get into it. But I do want to talk about some of the motives that we see right away. So this first one that you see in the first measure, the bum 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 bum, is something that's going to come up a lot. That octave leap that we see in the first beat comes up again and again and again. Sometimes it'll be more than an octave, it'll be a ninth, but it still does come up a lot. In the third measure, we've got this nice little, I can't really circle it very well, but we've got this 6, 5, 4, 3 descending scalar movement. Haydn uses this a lot in this piece. He also uses the ascending or descending thirds. You're going to see that over and over and over, so let's get to it. The transition is fluff. I'm calling it a suffix to the primary theme, mostly because harmonically we are not doing anything. We do have that motive of the 6, 5, 4, 3, that motion down, which I think is significant, especially in the transition. But then we go into a D major scale, and it just kind of suddenly comes upon this half cadence that is the medial caesura. It's very sudden. There's nothing that leads up to it. There's no predominant, but it is what it is. There is a pause. It's very obvious that this is where the medial caesura is. The secondary theme is now modulated into the key of A major, which is the 5 in the key of D major, which is, supposed to happen. I've called the secondary theme a hybrid. It's a CBI with a consequent. You can see my basic idea, my contrasting idea. I would like to use this later in my detailed analysis, so I'm only going to touch over some of the interesting things. Let's move on. As you can see, we've got a lot of things going on in this piece. In this first measure, we have a 7 diminished chord, which Haydn uses a lot of in this piece. Lots of leading tones, lots of 7 diminished chords, rather than using dominant chords in order to encourage us into a destination. As you can see, we've got the E in both our left hand and our right hand, and not necessarily a chord. Instead, it goes to an A major scale, but we still feel like we've arrived because of that lead-in. You can also see that in that second measure, we've got that same motive in the primary theme, that bum 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 bum. And again, down a little lower in those circles, we've got the octave leap that I was talking about. To me, this signifies that these are part of the same group, that they are part of the same phrase. This will come in handy a little bit later. These next 4 measures kind of expand a little bit and create tension until we suddenly come to a Neapolitan chord, which is kind of surprising. Haydn makes this very striking. It's kind of a big deal. I'm going to let you listen to it and see what you think. Neapolitan should stick out quite a bit. But Haydn took a page from Mozart. He's got a trill that leads us to our EEC, which is nice. And that leads us to our closing section. We've got a basic idea, it's embellished right after it, and then we've got kind of a little tag on the end, this 15151. I've called it a codetta. It's a little fluff. This leads us to the development. We have 3 units in a retransition. The first unit is a core. You can see the model, sequence, and the 2 fragments. I've also circled that motive that we see in the primary theme, and that occurs again in the sequence and in both of the fragments. The other thing that's noteworthy is that there is a 1-2-5-1 harmonic progression in this. We just barely saw that in the closing theme, and I find it interesting. And then we're followed up by the second unit. It's a chain of suspensions. I have labeled it as 1 going to 6. We start off with a D major chord with a 9/8 suspension, and then in descending thirds, eventually we make it to the relative minor of D major, which is B minor, and spend the third unit exclusively in B minor. The third unit of the development switches back and forth between the tonic and dominant of B minor. We've also got an F sharp in that second measure over and over and over, which makes me believe that this is a cadential 6/4 that wishes to go to a 5. But instead of reaching a 5, we kind of get the ugly stepsister. We get the 7 diminished 7, which is, the 5/7 without the actual root of the chord. Kind of important. Haydn kind of builds up our expectations, and then instead of resolving to the place or going to the place that we think that we're going to go, we don't. And that happens again in just 2 measures later when we reach the Neapolitan instead of, that F7, that F sharp 7 that we really wanted to reach. Here you can see in the third measure that we finally reach that F sharp 7 chord that we've been trying to get to the whole time. We have a nice trill in the right hand saying, hey, this is important. You made it, finally. But instead of going to B minor, which we expect, we have a deceptive cadence and instead go to a B7 chord. This signals the retransition and is kind of a very mini sequence. We've got the F sharp 7 to a B7 to an A7, and that is the dominant of, you guessed it, D major, which is what the recapitulation will be in. Fortunately, the recapitulation is almost exactly the same as in the exposition. We have the same kind of things that you saw at the beginning. Still that scalar movement down in that second system with the 6-5-4 to 3 movement. Here's where things get a little interesting. If you remember, our primary theme had a cadence. It had a nice little PAC that made us very happy. Here there is no cadence. Instead, we have an extended consequence, and kind of makes me believe that the primary theme kind of runs into the transition a little bit. I'm going to let you listen to this particular section. I find it very interesting. And then we return back to transition material that we had back in the exposition. So like I said before, there wasn't really a cadence. It's an extended consequence and kind of unusual. Nothing in the transition has really changed. However, you'll notice that we still have that same 6-5-4 scalar movement. And and we have that octave down in the third system. We have an octave D movement. We're going to listen to that. have that D octave, as I said before, and then we have a G sharp, as you see, the 7 diminished 6 of 5. So unlike the exposition where we just had a D major chord, this actually is leading and pushing us toward the half cadence of the medial caesura. Unlike the exposition, the secondary theme is in D major, so we're back in the home key. Everything is exactly the same. We still have that motive that we saw in the primary theme, but everything is exactly the same but in a different key. And as you can see, everything here is exactly the same. The only real difference is that our Neapolitan that we had in the key of A major is still a Neapolitan in that key, where we go to B flat. Till we finally get over to our dominant 7th chord and reach that ESC, which we have been building to this entire time. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. The closing theme is the same. We still have that 1, 2, 5, 1 progression, and that is the end of our sonata. Okay. All right, now we can get into the nitty-gritty. First, we're going to talk about a normative phrase. That'll be the primary theme, and my secondary theme will be the non-normative phrase. We'll go a little more in depth into themes and motive, but not really, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the Neapolitan. And we're back to our primary theme. This is very obviously a period. We have the basic idea in the first two measures, contrasting idea in 3 and 4 with a half cadence finishing it off, and then we have a repetition of the basic idea in the next couple of measures. The left hand is a little different, but it's still a D major chord, just with a little more motion. And then 7 and 8 are a clear mirror of the contrasting idea in the antecedent, ending with a PAC. So we have a very clear antecedent, a very clear consequent. It is the quintessential Kaplan period. And now we've reached our non-normative Kaplan phrase. I struggled with this. What I decided to call it was a CBI with a consequent. The CBI is only 5 measures long. Normally it's about 4. We do have an internal repetition. We've got the basic idea that is 2 measures long and a contrasting idea that is 3 measures long. You notice that that very last measure is extremely similar to the one next to it, and that's the measure that I decided to call an internal repetition. I did think about calling this a prefix, and I'll explain why in just a second. And as you can see, that top measure is what leads us into that, to the next half of our phrase. Those 2 measures are the next basic idea, the part of our consequent. It's repeated internally, as you can see in the next 2 measures. It's exactly the same. And then we finally reach our contrasting idea, which is 4 measures long. It's expanded a little bit. This is really cool, I think. In that first measure on the 3rd system, we have that 5-7 to 1 with that leading tone that kind of prevents us from feeling like we've resolved anywhere. What Haydn does is he takes that measure and squishes it. He kind of makes it into a half measure and then expands it, and makes that the next 2 measures. You see we've got that 5-7-1, 5-7-1, 5-7-1, 5-7-1, and he's basically taken that measure and made this consequent way longer before we finally hit that Neapolitan, and it's a reroute. Mm. All right, so I'm gonna let you listen to it real fast. There's the internal repetition. You can hear that. And then we finally reach the cadence, which is what we've been trying to get to this whole time. And so that's why I have called this a CBI with an expanded consequence. Going back to this, if you really did want to call those first 5 measures a prefix, I mean, we could call those next 2 measures basic idea, repetition of that basic idea, and it could be something like a presentation. Then moving on to the next half of our phrase, we could have the basic idea. I still think that this is an internal repetition. They are too similar for them not to be. And that Neapolitan just has to be a reroute. The reason that I call it a reroute is because it's unexpected first, but the material is different. We haven't seen those cascading 16th like arpeggios before. We don't see them again until we finally get to the development. And so the material is different, and we never really return back to the scales or these octave leaps that you're seeing in the right hands and the left hands. So even if we did have a prefix and a presentation or a CBI, I think it would still be similar enough that there isn't much of a difference. I'm standing by how I've analyzed it. All right, so I have a whole bunch of things that I kind of wanted you to look for. But I think that the descending and ascending thirds and the use of the leading tone are kind of ways that Haydn just uses to get from point A to point B. They're the tools that he uses. And the scalar movement just really isn't that interesting. There's not much to talk about. So let's move on to the octave leap and some of the things that we've seen there. All right, so we've got our primary theme, the one that comes back over and over and over again. We've got it in our primary theme, we've got it in our secondary theme, we've also got it in the development. It's in every section, and it keeps coming back. I've already talked a little bit about this, about how the octave makes us think about the primary theme. I want to reiterate that. Clearly, Haydn was taking something and trying to integrate it in as many different ways as he could. To make us think about this one more time. The Neapolitan chord kind of acts as both a theme that continually comes back and a harmonically interesting thing that I can talk about a little bit. It happens in every section. We have it in the exposition, we have it in the development, and we have it in the recapitulation. Just not necessarily how we were expecting it. Haydn makes a big deal of this chord. It almost feels cadential. We're building up to something, we're building up, and then we come to this Neapolitan, and there's even a nice big pause afterwards, as if it were a cadence. To me, this means that it's important, or at least meant to be interesting. After spending so much time with this piece, I kind of have formed some opinions about how it should be performed, and I'm going to share those with you if that's okay. In our primary theme, our contrasting idea is bum ba dum bum bum ba dum bum, right? And if you're playing it very quickly, it sounds very staccato. And so this is very difficult to do, but I think it should have a feeling of syncopation. Bum ba dum bum bum ba, like the 1 and 2 and 3. I think it's rhythmically interesting, and I think Haydn would approve, personally. In the transition of the recapitulation, we have that octave, as well as the 6-5-4 scalar movement. The octave is not what's important. It is something that makes it different and maybe a little bit more interesting, but it is not the melody. What is the melody is the 6-5-4-3, that descending scalar thing that we have been talking about a little bit. In our secondary theme, we have this bum bum ba dum, and the last two notes, the beat 4, should be slurred together. I've heard it done a couple of different ways. This particular edition that you are reading off of has it all staccato. Again, if you're playing it very quickly, it's difficult to slur them and make them sound connected. But I think that they should be. There is a motion about the notes. Bum, bum, ba-dum. Finally, we have the internal repetitions that we keep running across during this piece. When you have two things that are immediately repeated, you have to create contrast. The two examples that I have on the left should be done as a cadential echo would be done, where you have the first repetition be loud, and the second repetition should be softer, significantly so. All right, guys, let's wrap it up. Some things that I absolutely love about this piece is that it's fast. It is a lot of fun. Haydn's a jokester, and you can really tell in this piece. He's got some fun, plucky sections in this piece. It's really wonderful. But he also has some great moments of contrast, things like the Neapolitan chord that are very unexpected and a pleasure to kind of run across. My personal favorite section is the chain of suspensions in the development. This whole time we've had this very fast moving 16th note kind of a thing going on. And then we've suddenly run into this moment where we've got this long descending melody in the right hand. We still have the fast movement in the left, but the left hand's not really that important. What's important is the melody. And it's just nice to kind of sit in that moment and enjoy it. It's a beautiful moment of contrast. Some of the things that I really despise, though, are the fluff. It's not very much fun to analyze, it's not very much fun to listen to, and it's not even that much fun to play. Just a lot of tonic dominant going back and forth with that, and a lot of repetition, a lot of two-measure repetition. It's one thing if you can take a motive and like integrate it in a new and exciting way. That's all well and good, but there were some places where I wonder if he couldn't have done something different. That being said, I really do and love this piece, and if that's my only beef, then Haydn did a pretty good job. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. I'm gonna close, and thanks for listening to me ramble about this sonata. All right.